Thank you so much to Lara and Ellie for putting this event on as well. For those of you that know me, you can imagine how excited I was when I saw the call for papers, because not only is it an opportunity to once again dig into perceptions of ancient Egypt in modern popular culture, which are three of my favorite subjects, but then I managed to add in vampires and steampunk, which is absolutely perfect for me. So this is going to be a fun ride, I think. First of all, just to look at some definitions of steampunk. The term was first coined by Jeter in a 1987 letter when he said, "I think Victorian fantasies are going to be the next big thing, as long as we can come up with a fitting collective, something based on the appropriate technology of that era, like steampunks perhaps." Steampunk is a subgenre of science fiction, but it's also something more. It has something of the frivolous about it at first sight, relying on the aesthetics of Victorian design and steam engines and cogwheels and so forth. But there is more to it than that, as we shall see. There's a questioning, subversive element which digs more deeply and interrogates the status quo. It questions the technology upon which our sophisticated culture depends. Ada Lovelace is a character in one of the groundbreaking founding steampunk novels, The Difference Engine by Gibson and Sterling. She says, "We have sucked the lifeblood from the mysteries of the universe." Here we will see how ancient Egyptian receptions in popular culture can help redress the lack of universal mysteries. To go on to my classics, scholarly founding, as it were, Hardwick, who is one of the founding scholars of classical reception, coined the term critical distance, which she says uses the difference in time, place, and culture that exists between ancient and modern versions of a text in order to enable the reader, spectator, to move outside the limits of his or her own society and cultural horizons, and thus to see these more clearly and more critically. I would argue that fantasy and science fiction, and hence steampunk, utilize this exact same weapon of critical distancing to interrogate the world and the culture in which we live. There are many examples of steampunk in popular culture, and quite a few that include receptions of ancient Egypt, such as the Anubis Gates, another foundational steampunk novel which is being discussed by Dr. Pichel later, I think tomorrow, and brings ancient Egyptian gods and magic into an alternate Victorian world. The hot mess that is the 2017 film Gods of Egypt has several steampunk aesthetics, including a beautiful steampunk spyglass. There's a collection of short stories called Clockwork Cairo, which features part of the backstory to the events of Timeless by Gail Carriger. And then there's the 2010 Luc Besson film, The Extraordinary Adventures of Adele Blanc. The latter are my two case studies for today. First up is The Extraordinary Adventures of Adele Blanc, directed by Luc Besson, based on a series of comic books by Jacques Tardy and set in Edwardian Paris. Adele, our eponymous hero, is searching for the mummy of Patmoses, an ancient Egyptian physician of Ramses II, in order to reanimate him so that he may save the life of her sister, who is in a coma as a result of an unfortunate accident. This is the least preposterous part of the story. Modern medicine has failed her sister, and so she must resort to extreme measures in order to save her. This short trailer gives you something of the flavor of the film, which is absolutely fabulous. Luckily for Adele, she is friends with the elderly Professor Esperandia, who has been, she is friends with the elderly Professor Esperandia, who has been experimenting with a combination of modern science and apparently ancient magic rituals, and who succeeds in bringing a pterodactyl egg back to life. So he has fused modern and arcane technology in order to succeed. She decides that the only solution is to raise Patmoses using the professor's technique so that Patmoses can then save her sister using his long-lost medical expertise. Unfortunately for her, he is not a physician per se. Once she has successfully resurrected him, seen here drinking tea, he sadly tells her, "I'm a nuclear physicist. I deal in figures, signs, and equations," which does not help her directly, an example of an unfortunately incorrect translation. However, Thutmose and Adele go to the Louvre together and use the professor's technique to raise Ramses II and his entourage. The pharaoh's actual physician does then successfully use his advanced medical knowledge to save Adele's sister. Thank goodness. It is a film full of classical ancient Egyptian archaeological tropes. The pyramids, the sandy tomb with various traps, the local helpers, the very bad French archaeologist with extraordinarily bad teeth, reanimated mummies, and Adele herself is beautiful and feisty and practical. She's a cross between a female Indiana Jones and Evie from the Stephen Sommers mummy films, with a touch of Amelia Peabody from the great novels by Elizabeth Peters. This is also a steampunk representation of womanhood. It is an example of what McAllister calls steampunk's frequent practice of positioning women into otherwise denied roles of power and authority. Adele has taken on the task of finding a viable solution to heal her sister in a scientific, male-dominated world that has failed her, and she does it by resorting to ancient Egypt and its lost medical knowledge. My second case study is Timeless, a novel by Gail Carriger. It is the fifth in the book series called The Parasol Protectorate. It is set in a glamorous Victorian steampunk Britain. The empire is still in full sway. Supernatural creatures, vampires and werewolves, are recognized in society. And there are preternaturals, beings who have no soul and can neutralize the power of a supernatural with a touch. Our hero, Alexia, Lady Macon, is a preternatural married to a werewolf alpha, Lord Macon. This essentially sets the scene. Alexia receives a summons to travel to Egypt to meet the queen of the Alexandria vampire hive, Matakara. Joseph Clayton translated Matakara for me as possibly a Budge-style translation of Mat-Kara, one of Hatshepsut's names, meaning truth Mat is the soul of Ra. It is revealed elsewhere in the book that Matakara is indeed Hatshepsut. Gail Carriger, author of the book, is an archaeologist, so selected the name well, adding a touch of pleasing authenticity. The initial meeting with the queen is tragic. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the book here, but please be warned, this is a graphic description of a nasty piece of cyborg technology. So do go and make a quick cup of tea if you prefer not to hear it. She sat atop what could only be called a throne. It was mostly made of brass. Its base was some kind of tank housing 2 levels of liquid, the bottom a bubbling mess of yellow that heated the upper, composed entirely of a viscous red fluid that could only be blood. The arms of the throne were fitted with levers, nozzles, and tubes, some under the emaciated hands of the occupant, others going into or coming out of her arms. It was as though the woman and the chair had become one and had not been separated for generations. Some parts of the chair were bolted directly into her flesh, and there was a bronze half mask covering the lower part of her face from nose to throat, presumably providing a constant supply of blood. With the lower half of her head concealed, it was difficult to determine Matakara's exact appearance. Her eyes were large and very brown, too large in that emaciated face. She had the dark complexion of most native Egyptians, grown darker as it shrunk in against the bone, like that of a mummy. The expression on those eyes was one of immeasurable desperation and eternal misery. And thus Hatshepsut is described on Alexia's first meeting with her. She is the woman who becomes a regent and then a king, a pharaoh, strong and powerful. We do not find out how she becomes a vampire, but it is perhaps easy to understand why. She wanted eternal life, as did ancient Egyptians. She was a king, a virtual god already. It could be seen as a simple step for her to become a vampire queen and so ensure the immortality of her physical body. We are told by Alexia's husband that the year of her apparent death was actually the date when she was turned into a vampire, and that her mortuary temple near Luxor was in fact her metamorphosis temple. It is not revealed how or when the cyborg additions were made to her body. It can be inferred that despite her vampiric immortality, her body had begun to weaken and was becoming frail. So the monstrous technical interventions had taken place. It is implied that she was being kept alive against her will by her followers, as they had to have a vampire queen or die themselves. She had achieved the immortality she had craved, but at such a painful price. Now she just wanted it to end. Here, modern technology had succeeded in keeping her body alive, far beyond its sell-by date. It had succeeded too well, perhaps, and in the end, she had to resort to ancient magic and supernatural forces to enable her own death. You will probably be delighted to hear that she does accomplish this with Alexia's help. She becomes human and dies. So we have two examples of ancient Egyptian science, technology, magic, superstition, or whatever you want to call it, being used to solve situations that modern technology or science could not. Western civilization has Greek rationalism as one of its foundations. The ancient Greeks, however, included myths, gods, heroes, poetry, and religious observance in their studies of natural philosophy, as well as science. Modern Western culture seeks to adhere to science alone. So where can one go when that modern science fails? Ancient Egypt is the perfect candidate. As explained here by Bertie and Costa, the fabled lost repository of knowledge in the destroyed library of Alexandria has become one of the great archetypes of our civilization, like the Holy Grail or the city of Atlantis. So what better place to go for the knowledge that will resolve life and death situations that have been failed by modern technologies or science? And it is this use of ancient Egyptian lost technology or magic that can restore faith for someone who has lost faith in modern technocracy. And like Pandora and her infamous jar, it allows us to retain hope. And what more could we want from science fiction and fantasy and ancient Egypt? Thank you.